we look at the risk we face living here in Houston, it's a factor of three things. It's a factor of exposure. How many people are there? How much infrastructure is there? It's a function of the actual weather or climate event, but it is also a function of what? Of our vulnerability. Are we prepared, or are we resilient, or are we vulnerable? And this is the one that we have the most ability to move. There is a quote from John Holdren, who was the president's science advisor, who said, "We have three choices: mitigation, adaptation, and suffering. We are going to do some of each. The question is simply what the mix is going to be, because the more we reduce our emissions that are wrapping this extra blanket around the planet, the less adaptation is required and the less suffering there will be." So I want to finish, I should say. Ending sounds like I'm finishing right now. I want to end in the next 5 minutes. Always be clear on that. I want to end by looking at what does mitigation look like? What does adaptation look like? And what does suffering look like? To look at mitigation, the most important thing to do is to say, what's already at risk? What's already exposed? Our coastal infrastructure? Our inland infrastructure? What concerns do we already have? We already have concerns of social justice and economic inequity, aging infrastructure in bad need of repair, air quality and health impacts, freshwater inflows to critical marine systems. How do these connect to climate? Hurricanes may be what is on all of our minds, but there's more to it. We have heavy rain events, we have droughts, we have heat waves. All of these things affect us right here. So what does adaptation look like in Houston? There were some stellar examples just the past year. The golf course. You heard about the golf course, right? The Clear Lake golf course that they're converting into a reservoir saved several thousand homes from flooding. This article here, a remarkable success story that has remained untold, the performance of the Sims Bayou Federal Project, which actually succeeded in preventing the flooding that it was designed to. The UTMB facility in Galveston that had already weathered Ike and had decided to completely redo its energy system so it didn't have to go offline during Hurricane Harvey. It actually kept all the lights on, all the facilities running, all the storage of the dangerous diseases and viruses like Ebola going, did not have to evacuate because they were prepared. Buffalo Bayou Park weathered the flooding with limited damage because it was preparing. And we can see this resilience all around the world, whether it's installing drip irrigation in the dry parts of West Texas so we don't lose all our water as it falls from the pivot system to the ground, whether it's the Netherlands where they're building floating villages. That's pretty cool. So if it floods, who cares? There's amazing examples, and you're probably familiar with the report that just came out from the Houston Consortium on Mitigation. You can find this online, talking about all the different ways that we can be resilient. What does mitigation look like in Texas? The picture offers a clue. Mitigation means we're reducing the carbon emissions that are wrapping an extra blanket around the planet. How are we doing that, and who's doing it? Fort Hood is doing it. Fort Hood decided it was cheaper, and they were right, it was cheaper for them to go with wind and solar for their new energy contract because they'd save taxpayers, you and me, $165 million, and I'm great with that. In 2016, we got 12% of our energy from wind. In 2017, we got 18%. There are 25,000 jobs in the wind energy industry in Texas. There's more jobs in the solar energy industry now than the coal industry across the whole country. The Museum of Coal Mining in Kentucky put solar panels on the roof. We have towns like Georgetown going with renewable energy because 3 business students crunched the numbers and told them it just makes sense. Mitigation looks like a healthy economy. It looks like rural jobs. It looks like Texas exceptionalism and leading and growing and continuing to be an energy leader. Mitigation in Texas looks like a lot of really good stuff. But it isn't just about mitigation. Remember the quote? Mitigation, adaptation, and what? Suffering. What does suffering look like? Suffering looks like the devastation left behind by coastal storms when people are still struggling to rebuild their homes months later. Suffering looks like ground in the Arctic that is thawing and crumbling and falling into the ocean, putting 200 Native American villages at imminent risk, and they have no money to move. Suffering looks like the country of Bangladesh. 1/3 of the entire country was underwater this September, when the monsoon came late and was much heavier than it was before. Why? Because in a warmer world, there's more water vapor for it to sweep up and dump. And what does suffering look like in Syria? It looks like a record-breaking drought that was 3 times more likely as a result of a changing climate, which, occurring on top of an incredible influx of refugees from the Iraqi war, an extremely corrupt political system, the fact that farmers aren't allowed to dig wells unless they grease a few palms, and poor farmers don't have the money to do that. Along came the drought, and it was the camel that broke many of the farmers' backs. That is what suffering looks like in this world.